Hi, everybody. We are recording. This is David P. France, and I'm coming to you live from Basel, Switzerland. Before we get started, if you guys are out there watching the video, please like the video, subscribe to the YouTube or BitChute channel, and I'll also share the video content with your friends, your family on Facebook and other social media platforms. This is David P. France TV, and this is a platform where we are presenting creators and creative people, artists, inventors, thought leaders, small business owners, entrepreneurs, and the like. And today I want to introduce someone to you who I have been following for a long time on Instagram, and he has agreed to speak to us. And I want to first of all thank you, Aaron Henrikson. And Aaron is currently in Lisbon, Portugal. Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
this is fun.
And before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about what I know about him. I mean, he's from California. He's an Ivy League graduate. He's an artist. Currently, he's working as the makeup artist for Madonna. He is a really talented, very interesting, creative person who I've been, of course, these days you can look at Instagram and you can see what the person's up to. So let me allow you to talk about yourself now. I mean, tell us what you're up to currently and the like.
I just moved pretty recently to Portugal. I do travel all the time, and I have residences also in other places. And while I do sound very American sometimes because I was born in the United States, I've actually lived more than half of my life outside of the United States, and for, I guess, the largest portion of that in Italy. So I'm also an Italian citizen. And sometimes when I speak, I'm thinking in different languages and stuff. So sometimes my English sounds a little unusual. But I have had a long path to get to where I am today in Portugal, but there's lots of stops and interesting twists and turns along the way. And right now I'm in my Rainbow Wonderland, which is the house that I'm kind of working on in Portugal right now. And I like to live a life full of color, kind of in Technicolor, as you can see from my clothes. And I design also, so I might, start selling some stuff online in the future. I have a lot of things going on, but my main, profession is doing makeup, and that's what a lot of people know me for. So,
right. Yeah. Well, before we go into that, I'm gonna pull some other things up. This, you grew up in California, and you also grew up in a large Mormon family, and we were talking before about the difference between a California Mormon and a Mormon from Utah. I thought that was very fascinating.
Yeah, that's something that it's very like internal Mormon culture, which there are a lot of things that, people in whatever group or religious group know, and outsiders don't tend to know as much. But for a Californian Mormon, there's sometimes a bit of a superiority suggested in Californian Mormon, because it makes the suggestion that maybe we're more exposed to people of different religions, ethnicities, cultures, and people in Utah, they often are more surrounded by people with the same religious beliefs. So that was very different for me. And sometimes people think that I'm from Utah because they remember the Mormon bit, but in actuality, I pride myself on not being from Utah because I grew up in Venice Beach, California, which itself is a very colorful, interesting place that I'm very thankful for, because when you're living an experience, a lot of times you don't really realize what it's giving to you in the moment. And especially when there's hardships or challenges, you don't realize that they're making you stronger, like training. And part of me growing up in Venice Beach, with the challenges associated with that, also in a time when there was a lot of gang violence and it was more dangerous than today. It's something that now I appreciate, because I realized that I was given the opportunity to get to know so many people. Even though I dreamt of traveling the world, I kind of had the world coming to me. And that's when I started getting interested in my friends' different languages that they spoke at home and different cultures. And that was something that I was able to have in Venice that I wouldn't have had had I grown up in other places. Something that a lot of people don't know about Venice Beach, because nowadays they kind of think of it as where like Hollywood people go, and or they have some Silicon Beach thing, you know, nickname going on now for tech companies going there. It was very different before. When I was growing up, it was the peak of gang violence. Also, the racial makeup of Venice was very different, and something that a lot of people don't know about the history of Venice, and something that I feel, you know, as a white person, I can still share it, but it's something that if you want to do your own research to also hear it from, you know, people of color, you can go online and Google, for example, Inkwell Beach. That's something which is kind of a derogatory name for predominantly Black beach area. Was between Venice and Santa Monica, and that was gradually, of course, taken over by white people, you know, trying to get the Black community near the beach out of that area, and they are still, you know, progressing in that direction. So the racial makeup of Venice has transformed over the last, you know, 20 or 30 years. But something that people don't know, and that I feel I can share about Venice Beach, is that a lot of people know that maybe skateboarding was invented there. Rollerblades, I think, first made their appearance there. But something that people don't know is, like, I think the first known Black surfer was, you know, there because there was a Black community right near the beach, which is very unusual in the United States. And this is, of course, something that they don't teach in history classes.
No, of course.
With the internet, you can find out lots of things and go down rabbit holes and find out history that you didn't know about before. And even for me, there was certain bits that I kind of intuitively understood, like there's certain neighborhoods that tended to be more Latino or more Asian or more Black or more white, but I didn't know historically how those came to be. But when you do research, you realize, oh, one of the reasons that the redlining policies that discriminated against Black ownership and mortgages and housing in certain areas in the United States, that was like systemic discrimination for people of color. One of the reasons that it was different in that area was, of course, because it benefited white people for the Black workers to live in this area, because we had, like, back then there was, what do you call it, like oil industry, I guess, like kind of like oil, things like that. People will see them kind of over in Culver City, and people don't know the Bologna wetlands, where now there's all these big condominiums and stuff like that. They were like, it was like swamp or marsh. And have you ever heard the term swamp gas?
No, I have not.
Swamp gas, you know, there a lot of times in swamps you have pockets of bubbles that come up with like methane gas and stuff. It's because there's oil and methane area. And when they build on top of these like wetlands, there's still methane gas that's trying to escape, and it's kind of hazardous, but people can make millions of dollars, so they let them do it.
Well, let me ask you another question. So you grew up in Venice. You're like one of 9, or you have 9 brothers.
10 total, yeah.
One of 10. Where are you in the spectrum of like oldest to youngest?
I'm in the lower half.
You're in the lower half.
Is important because when at a certain point when I would come home, like I didn't have a lot of money growing up, like some people, I mean, I don't know, people might assume that a lot of people that work in fashion, they do often have wealthy parents, or a lot of actors often have wealthy parents because they can help support them through those times when you're not earning any money. But my dad was a public high school teacher, so he earned less than it cost for me to go to college for 1 year. So I'm in the lower half, and the reason why that's important is because at Christmas time, I used to have to scramble when I'd come home or go to my mom's house up in Northern California with my other siblings. I would have to scramble to get presents for everybody. And some people would get like a present from the dollar store, and then like my favorite siblings would maybe get something that was like maybe worth $15 or $20. And it was very stressful for me. And actually, even now, I don't really like Christmas or buying gifts for Christmas. I prefer to buy gifts for people or treat them to things when I see them in person, and not feel like I just have to buy something so that they can unwrap it. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like they're often not the best gifts when they're kind of forced and rushed. But a plan or a system that we worked out eventually was, in order to not just get lots of kind of crappy little gifts, was that we divided the siblings into halves. So the older siblings would exchange among themselves just to one person and give a gift that was like $100. And the younger kids, we would give one gift that was like $50. And then we would rotate the person we would give to each year so that we would have different turns and stuff.
Yeah.
But that was about
And you continue,
gift rather than lots of crappy stuff.
this is a side question, but how long did you guys continue this tradition? I mean, was at a certain point that did it taper off, you know, as you guys got older, or?
Yeah, once we kind of like stopped going home for the holidays, or at least I stopped going home. Actually, I don't know, I'm not sure, because I stopped going home for the holidays before everybody else. So maybe.
Well, look, this is a good opening. This is a good opening because now you guys will know why he probably was not going home, you know, because you had a lot to accomplish in a very short period of time. So from you grew up in Venice, but then you managed to attend Yale University, and your background or your major was linguistics. So how did this describe for us the process, what it was like? Was there a culture shock, etc.?
Yes, totally. I had no idea because the internet didn't exist back then. And I went in so blind, I had no idea what I was getting into. And actually my first choice school, I ended up thinking that I was convinced I wanted to go to Georgetown University because I thought I wanted to be a diplomat and work in the foreign service. And I feel like when you're younger, you know, when you say you want to be an astronaut or you want to be a fireman, it's because those are the jobs that you know of. But if you think about the thousands of jobs that are out there that you don't have any idea of when you're a kid, and they don't have that picture in the coloring book, I found, you know, I didn't know what my career was going to be, but I was pretty convinced I would go into foreign service, and I wanted to go to the best school for that, which was Georgetown. Mm-hmm. That desire stemmed and grew into my linguistics research and study. But it was started from having a lot of friends who spoke different languages in Venice Beach, and being in a school where there were more people who spoke Spanish, you know, than, well, I guess, I don't know, I have to work out the percentages, but we had like about 40% Latino population. So we had a lot of people who spoke Spanish. And for me, I would always tell my friends, like, I think I heard you say my name. They would call me Aron, you know, and I would say, I think you said my name. One day I'm going to understand what you're saying, you know. And actually one of the girls I said that to ended up becoming my girlfriend in high school. But Leticia, I said, you know, one day I'm going to understand what you're saying. So once I had the opportunity to take language courses, I think when I was like 14 or so in middle school, Mark Twain Junior High in Venice, we had drive-bys even at our middle school, by the way, just letting you know. I started studying Spanish, and then I would practice with my friends after class. And then I remembered it. So then when I got to the second year, I remembered everything. And then they just had me skip to the third year.
I see.
Oh, this is kind of fun. And then by the time I got to the AP class, there were only 4 kids that weren't native speakers in the class. And I got the, you know, highest score possible on the national exam and everything. I had friends to practice with. So it was kind of like having an exchange program in my own, you know, hometown. And a lot of times, back then, the white kids would often study French because it was considered more sophisticated. Right. Because Spanish had, you know, negative associations for a lot of people because it's associated with maybe like poor immigrant communities and things like that. And these are dynamics that I can intellectualize now, but I had an instinct for it back then. But I was like, that's really dumb. When are you going to use French? I mean, maybe you would in Switzerland, but you know, you have to go to Canada in order to speak French pretty much in LA when everybody around us was speaking Spanish. And so it just seemed obvious to me. But then from there, I was like, wow, this is kind of fun. And when I was in this English class where we had to memorize the etymologies of a lot of different SAT words, and I'll always thank this English teacher, Mrs. Khan, she was like one of the best teachers I ever had. She had us learn the etymologies of words. And then I started to be able to notice patterns, and I started to be able to guess the etymologies of words. I was like, that sounds kind of like Old French, or that sounds like Old Norse, oh, that sounds Latin. And I was just kind of notice patterns and recognize patterns. And then I felt like I wanted to study another language when I got into high school, because Venice High School started a special program, a magnet program, where they offered more languages than the standard languages taught in a public school. So we had in addition to Spanish and French, we had German, Russian, Mandarin, Japanese, maybe, I don't know, something else that I'm not thinking of, but, Italian, I guess. And so even though I wasn't officially part of the magnet program, because I just lived a couple blocks away from the school, that was my normal school I would go to, and some of my friends were in the magnet program, and they thought they were better than me, I actually became a spokesperson to try to convince parents to send their kids to our magnet program, because by senior year, I had studied English, German, Spanish, Italian, French, and Japanese.
Okay,
and
so wait.
I skipped a year in all of them. And I took
how many did you study? How many languages did you?
Spanish, Italian, French, English, German, Spanish, Italian, French, Japanese. That's 6.
So look, let me ask you a question before you. It seems as if you're able to process very, very quickly, almost like you say, you recognize patterns, or what is it that you've talked about it a bit. What is it about your learning, your ability to learn, that's distinguishing you from maybe other people, other peers, maybe members of your family? I mean, is there anything there, do you think?
Yeah, I think that having a slightly different outlook, I feel like, if you take twins and you separate them, we learn about these things in biology, but you also learn about them in linguistics. And actually you could say even in Switzerland, if you go from one valley to the next, you take 2 brothers, they're going to evolve differently. You take 2 animal species, they're going to evolve differently if you put one on one geography and another in another geography. And it just takes time. For me, it happened a little bit more quickly because I was in an environment that I think I had, like, it's kind of like with natural selection or evolution, that if you have just the right factors, like to create a diamond, you can, turn coal or carbon into a diamond. It's kind of like that for me, that by being curious and then having it stimulated more by having interesting people around and not having the internet, I think about nowadays, like if I had had the internet growing up, how quickly I could have learned, because I had to make so much effort to go to the library. I actually volunteered at the library and would look at books and stuff while I was there too. And I had to go and research things and had to go look in encyclopedias. The one benefit I did have is that my dad, even though he was a public high school teacher, he had 3 degrees. So he had a lot more information than an average parent. So that made some learning a bit quicker. But I see, like with my brother or some of my siblings, they didn't take advantage of that knowledge. And I feel like a lot of my learning was just because I recognized the opportunity and I took it. Whereas most people stay complacent, and they like, especially if you think about people who are very privileged and have all the opportunities in the world, but they don't feel any kind of necessity to use all the opportunities that they have. For me, I was like, there's an opportunity, I'm going to take it. And I think that mindset helped me take advantage of the really cool situation that I was in Venice, but also with my dad. Like, he was a nuclear engineer for some of his career, and he, if I asked him, like, Dad, why is the sky blue? He'd talk about like the refraction of going through the atmosphere, and at different angles going through different amounts of atmosphere, we're going to get certain wavelengths like blues, or you're going to get more like reds and stuff as it goes through a thicker kind of slice of atmosphere towards the sunset. And it wasn't just like, oh, God made it that way, But now kids can Google anything. I mean, also stuff maybe they shouldn't be Googling, but there's so much access to information. I feel like when I see my friends' kids learn so quickly, it's because they're sponges, but there's way more that they can absorb because they have access to information back then. So I kind of like took advantage of things around me.
But I mean, I'll just compare it to my upbringing. Then we just briefly, I was not conscious of the fact that I had access, or that I was privileged, if you would call it that. I mean, I went to an integrated school that was more recently, I guess, in the history of the United States, integrated. And it was all kinds of people, but mainly Jewish, Italian, Irish, immigrant, first, second generation, and then some Black. But I mean, I did have a special upbringing, but I never thought about it, consciously thought about it when I was going through it. I always thought it was, difficult. right? I just
But
thought
I
it
also
wasn't until
think that it's
many
interesting.
years later.
I think it's interesting that you call it an integrated school, because that, by just the description, signifies that it wasn't integrated at some point.
Not like yours, right?
Concept growing up, because my school was just, you know, mixed with lots of different kinds of people. So I remembered any time that there wasn't, but that's California,
Right.
because it doesn't really have as much history of those things. Though we do have a history of discrimination, it was much more rooted long-term in other parts of the country. So I didn't know that, like, some of my friends' parents, they were like early couples that were interracial couples getting married. Like, I didn't realize that they weren't allowed to, like my parents' generation, they literally were like within years of when it was even legal to get married with somebody of a different, you know, race, which is crazy. But California was one of the kind of earlier, had lots of kids that were like multiracial. Like one of my friends, he was Chinese and Jewish, which most people aren't used to finding like that combination, but lots of people of different mixes and stuff.
Well, let me ask you this. So you talked about Yale, you were a linguistics major, right? And so you did really well in school, right? This probably, I can already envision how probably what you absorb things. I mean, in a very, very rapid pace. That's what I sense. But they're also in your abilities, it's not just a linear kind of thing that's happening, right? But we'll get back to that. So there's an issue I want to that I want to focus on, which is that you came out before attending Yale. Yeah. Describe what that process was, and you also talked about, and you'll talk about this also later. You've been with the same, you've been married for 25 years. You've been in a relationship for 25 years, which is fairly remarkable.
Yeah, it's weird because now we have people that are like, you could be our child, you know, like, and like when I work with models and stuff like that, it's kind of funny to think like they could have been our baby or something. Let's see, that process, one of the, this also ties into my kind of the little random factor or mutation. I kind of think in biological terms that whatever it is in me, that little spark or something that kind of made me evolve differently in my family is also in part thanks to my difference of being gay, because that made me start questioning things. Like I had to do, my dad was a scientist, so I did have enough critical thinking skills to try to work out kind of like a proof to try to say, well, if I'm this way and I pray every day and it doesn't work for God to make me straight, then I need to change some factor to keep on like experimenting to find the solution. And then you start to consider other possibilities. Like in research, you're like, wait, maybe I'm doing everything that's necessary, but maybe I'm supposed to be this way. Maybe somebody created me this way, or, you know, maybe what they told me about some entity that, you know, gives us life here isn't all, you know, what I was taught. So I started questioning the existence of God when I was like 12 and 13, which is really early compared to a lot of people. But that little seed started to grow. And then by questioning my religious upbringing, which Mormonism is a newer religion, and those tend to be a little bit closer to fundamentalism, like the newer a religion is, the closer they are to kind of like their most religions start as a sort of cult or sect, and then actually become a little bit more, you know, a little less extreme. But Mormonism is still pretty strict in their rules. So I had to think like, okay, am I, you know, not going to be able to get to, we have like 3 levels of heaven that you can get to after in the afterlife. And I remember when I was younger, even before I came out, and even before I really was conscious of being gay, I remember asking my mom, because our ideal is to get to the celestial kingdom, which is the highest level, like the best heaven where you can be with our Heavenly Father. And Mormons are supposed to be able to get there. So if we get into all the history of who's not supposed to get there, that gets interesting too, but I don't know how much time we have. But I asked my mom, because I envisioned it kind of like in a mall where they had escalators going up to different. And I thought, like, if I wanted to get to the 3rd level, I was like, well, Mom, what if I can't get up to the 3rd level and you guys are up there? And then I said, like, can you guys come down and visit me and stuff? And I was asking these things, I think when I was like around 10 or so, because I just felt like either I knew something was a little off with me, or I just wanted to know the rules of this game to see if there was any wiggle room for, you know, my positioning or choices I made, to know exactly what game I was playing.
Right.
But then I had to deal with a lot of issues, because I realized when I was around 13 or so that it wasn't going away, and that was the worst year of my life. I went to live with my mom in Northern California. Worst year of my life, because there it was mostly white kids. And that's another way that I learned to appreciate my experience in Venice even more, because when I went up there, everybody was white. And then I stood out like a sore thumb, or like a, you know, rainbow unicorn. I wasn't super effeminate, but I was just off and weird, and my sense of humor that now is still weird and quirky, I hadn't, you know, rounded my corners at all. And so I was just socially awkward, weird, and spastic because I was hyperactive. And that hyperactivity, which, you know, the doctors recommended I go on Ritalin and stuff like that, my dad wouldn't let me do that because he didn't want me to get started medicating early on, which now they realize is detrimental to a lot of people. But my dad was good. He just, you know, said, pick a sport, any sport, and go for it. And so I started running, because it was a way that I could, you know, work on my energy. And also I would just do lots of things. And instead of medicating, I used my energy to do all sorts of things. I also drink coffee, which is very Mormon, or tea. And sometimes I get this chai tea latte from Starbucks, though, which is some kind of syrup that I think has tea in it. So that's my cheat. Let's see where I was going with that. Let me see if I can get back.
This is more about like what you're saying. You went from a path from coming out, then going to Yale, and then meeting your. When did you meet your partner or your husband? When did that? Because if it's 25 years, that means that it happened fairly, you know, in quick succession.
Really young compared to, I mean, when I was 21. So I met him when I started dating at the very end of high school, and I didn't realize that, you know, somebody had saw me going into a gay club in Los Angeles, and I also used to go to these gay youth support meetings in Los Angeles, and that helped me become a little bit more open, so that by the time I got to college, the first semester, not everybody in my residential college at Yale, it was like our dormitory building, not everybody knew I was gay by the first semester, but by the second semester, I think pretty much everybody knew. And it wasn't like I was like rainbow flag wearing as much back then, but maybe, I can't remember if I did drag my first Halloween there or something, but people started to figure it out. If I had never had a conversation with them, they kind of knew. And it made it easier if you didn't have to tell everybody, if other people gossiped for you and kind of you know, broke the ice for you, so you didn't have to like be like, I have something to tell you. And then when I was in college, I took all these lessons that I learned as a Mormon, because in Mormonism, they teach us how to be missionaries from when we're little kids. And they imprint us from when we're really little. We learn this song that's like, I don't know how to sing well, but it's like, I hope they call me on a mission when I have grown a foot or two, because by then I'm sure I will be ready to teach and preach the way that missionaries do. And like, get raised our whole lives to go for 2 years, where we pay for it ourselves to go convert people for this church, who will then become tithe payers and pay 10% of their earnings for their entire lives every single year. It's like the best, you know, business plan ever. But part of that training is that we learn how to proselytize, how to get people to get closer to the church. We also are taught this thing called convert by example. So basically, all Mormons you meet are always nice people, always hard workers, really friendly, often charismatic, very healthy when we're young. But then we get the sugar addiction, you know, and then our metabolism doesn't work so like 30, because our drug is sugar, because we can't do anything else. So then I used the skills or things that I was taught as a Mormon, and I applied them to coming out. And what I did is I did kind of like, we have to give talks in church, and we have to learn how to do public speaking in front of our congregation, even when we're really young. So what I did is I started speaking out on campus. I became the head of our gay men's group at Yale. And I would speak out like on a megaphone, you know, on activist days, and do, you know, die-ins for ACT UP type stuff, and for AIDS activism and things like that, which was, you know, still is important, but it was like,
it was very important back then.
People were dying.
Yeah.
And I was scared to death that I was going to die. I didn't know how much time I had, but I was going to make sure that I did everything I could to support the community that I found myself part of, and use the skills from Mormonism to not convert, but to welcome, to be a good example, and to speak out publicly with confidence, to help kind of dispel myths and be a good example for other people. And then while I was at Yale, I went as an exchange student for my junior year abroad to Italy, University. And when I was there, we went out clubbing at this little like castle-like building that was across the street from my apartment that they just put me in randomly. It was like this little cute castle that also was the gay and lesbian headquarters of Italy. And they had a club night to make some money for fundraising. And I went there, and this really awkward, nerdy guy with like a Christmassy kind of, not Christmas sweater, but like an ugly sweater, kind of wool sweater inside this tiny hot club, so bad dressed for a club, but he seemed so sincere. He stood out in a way that, that caught my eye. And it turns out he was on the ultimate Frisbee team with one of my exchange student roommates. And so he became a friend of our group of friends. We didn't know if he was gay or straight or anything, but I found out eventually.
And this is the person you ended up. Well,
yeah.
I want to be cautious of time. I'm going to ask you some really quick questions.
Sure.
And I mean, look, as you said before we start, we could talk all day because it is, your life is fascinating. You guys, you're not even, I'm trying to get most of it out in about 30 minutes or so. But I will ask you some other things that we had not covered. So we at least got to Italy, right? Just, you know, how did you transition into makeup? I think you work with Pat McGrath, who I've told you before, I've run into almost like, I'm not saying she's like a ghost, but you know what I mean? She's like someone that I happen to, like, hey, there she is, you know, and I've had more.
Yeah, she's a fairy godmother. She flies around the world with bags full of makeup. And all over the
so
place.
How did you get involved? How did you get involved in makeup, and tell the story how you managed to, you know, work for one of the most famous women and artists in the world? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, I always was an artist, and I would always draw obsessively growing up and draw superheroes, and I loved comic books because they had characters like the X-Men who were outcasts and mutants that were enemies to their own family, which for me, that was the, you know, most exact parallel I could find of being, you know, a gay Mormon and kind of like an enemy in my own home, and that I thought I would get kicked out if they ever discovered me. So the comic books led me to, when I took art classes, to start to draw from figure drawing from like magazines, from fashion magazines that they had in my art classes. And then I started to see that like supermodels looked kind of like superhero women. And so I kind of transitioned from my superhero interest, which I still like, but, you know, before they were cool with all the Marvel movies, when it was just a thing to be a comic book, you know, nerd, I found escapism and survival through comic books and through science fiction. But then I started to appreciate the dramatic poses and that supermodels look like the superhero women in comic books. So I started to draw fashion photos and magazine, you know, pictures and things. And so I started to develop my eye for costume design and got interested in fashion. And my dream, if I could have chosen, you know, if I didn't have to work for money, I thought, oh, I'd just be an artist, like a fine artist of some kind, or a fashion designer, or a photographer. But my dad, who's very practical, he said, you know, you can't make money as an artist. And I understand now that it was good advice for that time, because I would tell my kid too, get some practical skills, get some practical knowledge, and then cultivate your art along the way with it, but always have something to fall back on. I always say to people that ask for advice, I say the number one thing is make sure you can pay your rent, and then you build on that. And that's why people who don't have to pay their rent have such a big advantage when their parents help them. But that wasn't the case for me, because we didn't get extra money and stuff like that. So I started working when I was 15 years old, 5 nights a week until midnight at a movie theater, because I could do that after track practice and after all my clubs and stuff. So then when I went from Yale, I thought, okay, I'm going to get a degree in something that's a little bit more practical, or in any case, by going to college, which I thought of going to art school, which would have been more, you know, my dream or fantasy. I was like, I need to just get that under my belt, go to a school with a strong academic reputation so that I can always get a normal office job in the, you know, future. And while I was there, I started, you know, experimenting with drag and photography, where I would like dress up for my, you know, self-portraits and things in college, and working in transformation and imagery of photography. I started to learn more about how to transform people with makeup and hair and clothing, even though I would just do stuff, you know, borrowing makeup from my friends or a wig from a friend. Actually, Olaya gave me, my friend Olaya, shout out to her, she gave me my first wig and she let me keep it. You know, I got little bits of makeup from people, and then I would use it to make people look good in photos. And this was before Photoshop, so I had to really work on the lighting and understand the lighting aspect. But what I understood is that people who became fashion photographers usually came from families with money, because it was super expensive to develop the rolls of film, make contact sheets. Basically, if you were a photographer in the 80s or 90s, you were from a rich family. And I realized that even my photography course was too expensive for me. Just to buy like a pack of paper that I had to develop, if you mess up one of your prints, you have to, it's like losing like $2. For me, it was super expensive. And I realized once I got out of college that I was good at the makeup part, because it's kind of like drawing and painting, which I was good at. And that if I did makeup, I could just invest in like all the basic colors of makeup and some basic eyeshadows. And with that kit, I could kind of invest in that. And then I could work with other photographers, learn how they work, learn more about photography. And I realized it was more of a fast track that was more affordable and still allowed me to be creative by specializing in like something that was under the category of photography, but not what I intended. Mm-hmm. Then I, you know, went to do tests for modeling agencies and things like that, getting to know more photographers. And when I went from my smaller agency to a bigger agency, one of the main driving motivations for going to that bigger agency in Milan was because they had some artists who worked with Pat McGrath, who is still really big back then because she did all of the Italian Vogue covers. And for those who don't know, Italian Vogue has always been more experimental and creative than American Vogue. So for people who really like fashion, they know that that's like where the interesting stuff happens. And she had a sort of monopoly for over 2 decades of only her work being on the cover of Italian Vogue. So she's a legend and an icon.
It's amazing.
She does more of the top shows than any other artist in the world. And the only way you get to work on those shows is by going under the banner of the Queen of Makeup. And I was hoping to be able to join that team. And one time when I got into this new agency, that was a bigger agency than my first one, I was assisting somebody, and I didn't know that he worked with Pat McGrath, but I was saying, you know, like, oh, I would do anything to work with Pat McGrath. I'd like, you know, mop the floors, or, you know, I don't care, grunt work. And he's like, oh, well, you know my sister. And I literally didn't know, because I didn't know who in the agency worked with her, but I knew, because it wasn't like you could check things online, kind of like nowadays. I didn't know, but I knew some people from the agency. I worked with her. And so I got to start working with her, and then I made a good impression. And then I, you know, at first it's like kind of a trial. You just do, you know, makeup or something for the first time. But then I got faces from then on, and kept my humility, learned how to work in these, you know, interesting competitive environments in fashion, in the fashion world, kind of like the Devil Wears Prada situation, and lots of people dynamics. And coming from a big family means that I can understand larger groups that have lots of contact with each other when there's, you know, little infighting and battles and weird stuff going on, and just trying to maintain stability through all the drama of Fashion Month, because, you know, some teams just do New York or Paris or whatever, but we did all the big cities. And it's like a month of work where we get very little sleep. And then I assisted Pat on all these shows for over a decade. And I got to even work on really big photo shoots with her, with Stephen Meisel, you know, the one, you know, amazing, it was like amazing life experiences. And then, you know, from that, where do you go? where do you go? Like, okay, I thought, well, I could aspire to become the next Pat McGrath or something, but actually I realized she works so much to be where she is. That's why she's number one. You know, she's works all the time and everything.
It's inner.
That I wanted to prioritize in a certain way in my relationship, because also it's very difficult to maintain a stable relationship when you're traveling around the world for photo shoots all the time.
And just to be clear, you're in Italy at this point, right? You're living in Italy
yeah, I was living in Italy ever since graduation, because I basically had my husband come over to stay with me for part of my senior year, and then he had to go back, and then I moved to Italy right after, and then I stayed in Italy.
Jeez. Well, let's cut to the, like to end, because I don't want to keep you or hold you any longer. Right. So you go from Pat, and then you get picked up by Madonna, and you've been working with her ever since. Is that the trajectory?
Yeah, it's kind of, and of course there's lots of things in between to get there, but I have to say that working with you know, the top runway show team in the world exposed me, almost like immunized me a little bit to working with supermodels and legends for me and icons, you know, getting to be in runway shows where you'd have like, you know, Naomi Campbell and Linda Evangelista or people like that, you know, you get, these were like icons for me. So I got exposed to that enough so that when I got my big opportunity to work with M, it felt a little bit less like of a shock for me, even though I just tried to stay super focused. And it's kind of like muscle memory. When you do something long enough, then you can function even when there's extreme scenarios and, you know, you're like freaking out, oh my gosh, like inside I could still be professional and get it done. And I guess I did well because I got called back, and here I am many years later.
Look, I mean, look, I'm gonna end it now, but I'm gonna ask you to come back at some point in the future, because there's so many things that we could just talk on this. And look, I mean, you and I have very different backgrounds and really like how we live, but I think there's a lot of similarity. And I haven't, you know, of course,
there's a lot of similarity. Did you know that I used to live in Switzerland?
No, I didn't know that. I mean, where were you? Ich spreche keine Schweizerdeutsch.
Ja, wir können auch Hochdeutsch reden.
Ja. Or ja, und dann
I like how you say ja. It's like also because you're in Basel, and in Canton Aargau, which is in like a small town, but that was its own experience. So yeah, I have a Swiss experience. And people in the world understand that.
Look, it's treated me very well. I mean, I have no complaints. You know, that's a whole other story. And I grew up in, I learned Italian as my first language, but I don't know it as well. I speak, because in our town, because there were a lot of Italian American or immigrants from Italian background, they had that as an elective, a language elective.
Ah,
so I just thought,
awesome.
And they had German, they had Italian. I mean, so I went from Baltimore to South Orange, New Jersey. So I went from more integrated, right, to less integrated. It wasn't like what you experienced, but there's some similarities there. We could talk about that, you know, and that's a whole other episode. But I mean, I can tell you right now, you guys, when I met him, we had a conversation and I was blown away, just in terms of the speed in which you were giving me and talking to me and giving me.
I know I kind of talk too quickly sometimes, but I have a lot that I.
No, I get it. I understand it. Let me ask you this last question. This will be the last question. Do you consider yourself driven, or is it just this is the way it is for you? I mean, you tell me.
I feel that I was more driven. I feel like I was driven in the right times in my life that ended up in hindsight being the right times in my life. And I feel that you can kind of compare it to bike riding, and also or my cross-country training, that one thing that my coach stressed is that you need to push on the transitions, because most people get a little lazy when they get to the top of the hill, and that's where you can gain something, because psychologically people like, you know, go slower on the curves, go slower on the hills, and sometimes that's where you need to speed up. And I think that I applied that to my life, and I was so driven when I was a teenager because of a Mormon teaching. They kind of like in order to make sure you're not so tempted by, you know, worldly desires, they tell us that we're supposed to do exercise to kind of, you know, let off steam and things like that. So a lot of Mormon, you know, teenage guys are good in sports and stuff like that. But I also just kept myself super busy so that I would be involved in so many clubs, so many activities, and working every night on weeknights that I could kind of distract myself from my depression, from my own struggles, so that I could just be focused on something, and that helps pull you through or for me, help pull me through darker times, because I just focused on anything that brought me joy, anything that made me feel like I was not only joy, but also deferred joy, things that I knew would bring benefits to my life if I invested now. And I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to go to a good college. I need to save money so I can go study in other countries and live my dreams. And I needed to make it happen. And the good thing is I didn't come out too early. And I felt like if I had come out too early, I would have started dating and I would have lost my way, because I've been like, wow, it's amazing. And fortunately, I didn't do it until the very end of high school, after, you know, like I already had all my grades set and stuff. So, and then when I got into college, I was driven kind of like a second wind, where I felt like I needed to prove myself, because I was at school with so many brilliant people and everybody seemed smarter. I'm sure you experienced this too, like at Penn, that when you get to college, you are no longer the biggest fish in the sea. You're like, oh, there's geniuses right and left, and everybody's good at things. And you recognize what's good, what other people do better than you, and you often take for granted your own skills. So I realized that I needed to kind of prove to myself that I could do well even in that environment academically, even though there were some courses were super challenging, and I wasn't used to being that challenged. American high school is pretty easy, that was where I finally got, you know, a little bit more challenged, but it was to prove to myself I wasn't a mistake being here. I was, you know, I deserve to be here. And then after that, it was about like applying, okay, I got my degree. I have established that I'm good academically and that I can accomplish what I put my mind to. Now I'm going to try something that's more risky and try to go into something that's like flaky and weird and unstable, like an artistic path. But I also taught English to companies like IBM and Anderson Consulting and stuff like that. I was an English teacher to pay my bills, to pay my rent, while I would do little makeup here and there for little photo shoots and stuff. And also, one of the first makeup artists I assisted was actually a trans makeup artist. I won't say her name because I don't know if she's open, you know, to the world. But I got some of my first makeup experiences with her, and because at the time I just had a few books. There was like the books from Kevin O'Quan. We didn't have a lot of information like nowadays on the internet to learn, so a lot of it was trial and error. And I'd say now in this stage of life, you know, after being driven in fashion and, you know, pushing hardcore with some things, I wanted something that was the next challenge. And I think that working in entertainment, with going on tour, world tours, that's a different challenge. But I used the skills from, you know, my runway background, and I applied them to, you know, stressful moments backstage and the quick change and things like that. But I kind of just follow whatever's the new interest or challenge in my life. But I don't feel that I'm as competitive as I was when I was a teenager. And for me, it's a good thing, because I realized the point is kind of like in my cross country and track and field background, when I was the captain of my team, and I would encourage other people, even if they weren't ever going to get first place in a race, I said, it's always a race against yourself. You're trying to get a couple seconds off your time. You're trying to improve against yourself. And for me, that's my life philosophy, is I realized, you know what? Okay, some people, they launched their careers 10 years earlier than I did. And so what? Good for them. I'm glad for them. Everybody has their own path. But for me, it's about doing things that keep me interested, doing things that make me feel stimulated, excited, and interested. So I follow anything that I feel is interesting for me. And right now, you know, living in a different country, because I've lived in Italy for so long, we're like, let's come and start a new adventure in Portugal. You know, like when I started studying Mandarin, I was like, you know, so much in the world is focused on like the Chinese economy, and why not go and find out more about this global superpower? So we just started studying Mandarin, and I just kind of, you know, follow what interests me, and then I'll have bored and never have a dull life.
You're not. Let me tell you something. You are not dull at all. I mean, you have accomplished an amazing amount of things, and it really is inspirational. I mean, I want to thank you for agreeing to do the interview. I think it was really important, not only for me, but for other people who are creatives. And, specifically, a lot of the people that I've interviewed are, some of them are alums of the University of Pennsylvania, people that I have met years ago. And I thought when I was talking to you on the phone, I was like, there would never be anybody at Penn.
Well, maybe we hope nowadays. But even when I went to Yale, I thought that it was going to be ultra conservative because I didn't know. I'd never visited before. Most people, they take trips to like the universities to scout them out. I just got a pamphlet in the mail, and I thought, wait, when I just applied because I wanted to see if I could get in, just for my own ego because I had good grades and everything.
Why not?
And my counselor was like, oh, you should apply some of these schools. But I was like, I know what I want. I want to go to Georgetown. But then when I got into Yale, I was like, I can always specialize later on, but what would my 30-year-old self tell me? And my 30-year-old self would have said, take that unique opportunity, because if there's a chance to do Georgetown or specialize later on, you can always do that. But this Yale thing seems like a desirable, unique life experience that I tried it. When in doubt, I choose what is the more interesting life experience. And when I went there, I thought it was going to be really conservative. I didn't know that they were one of the most liberal Ivy League schools.
Yes.
And now they're even more accepting and embracing of the LGBT communities and stuff like that. Georgetown wasn't at the time. They couldn't even use campus buildings for their meetings. Yale was much more advanced for that. And I'm so glad I made that choice, but it was in blind faith. And I thought it was really conservative, that a really conservative environment that I was going to be going to. So sometimes we're happily surprised. But I didn't know, and each different personalities, but you can always find interesting and brilliant people wherever you are.
Well, this is true. This is true.
One little last anecdote from my Yale versus fashion experience. When I realized working with like teenage models, it reminded me of when I was an exchange student in Switzerland, and I had friends from all these different countries and cultures, and I wanted to be a diplomat because I felt that I could somehow recreate that excitement and experience and learning about the world and living in different countries. But I didn't realize that being an international makeup artist allowed me to satisfy that same need and desire to learn about different cultures and languages. And even though I wasn't sitting at the dinner table with people that now have, won awards for whatever fields they're in, now I would be with like a teenage model from Russia, and then I'd have to learn words in Russian to be able to communicate because, people didn't speak English necessarily very well to communicate when they start off in modeling. And then I realized that it's not just about having people with a high education level that you can learn from. There's always something you can learn from anybody in the world. They always have some life experience different than yours, something that they've lived, something that they have learned. It could be a language, could be a life experience, social experience. There's always something you can learn from anybody. So I realized, wow, I learned all about different languages and cultures from teenage models. And I learned Portuguese from starting from models too, It's all.
Look, you've accomplished a lot, and yeah, much respect. We have we had an interview with Cara Young, who's a supermodel. She came up in the early 80s with the
I saw that.
You saw that. And look, I had a similar experience, and I will tell you this. I told her, I said, I went to Penn because I think that was the only track that I knew, but if I had to do it over again, I probably would have been running around with her somehow in New York City and likewise, I think, for someone that chose a traditional path, you've done an excellent job of really taking advantage of every opportunity. And I commend you, and, I'm looking forward to presenting the interview so that people can really see, what this platform is possible of providing for people, because there's a lot of
and that's one of the best ways, especially for creatives, because we don't have a real rule book that ever works consistently for everybody. The best you can do sometimes is learn kind of patterns or tendencies that have worked for several other people, and then make your own way with the knowledge of how other people have made their way. We each got to make our own path, but it's important to see how other people have kind of done their own paths. So
wow.
that
sounds like the last word. And look, I mean, we went over, but look, I want to thank you. This was amazing. I mean, I'm like, my skin is like going, it's like a vibration, and that's always a good thing, right? Thank you so much. Is there anything else? I mean, I'm going to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to say? But
if you want to see more of my world and what I'm about, you can check out my Instagram, Vision Aaron. And that's with 2 A's. And I like to live my life in Technicolor and share some of my adventures along with my thoughts on all different subjects along the way with colorful, creative images.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. And we'll talk soon. I'm gonna load this up as quickly as possible, right. And we see what happens. We'll talk.
All right, cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care of yourself, man.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.